is intended for mature, open-minded audiences only. If you are easily offended, we suggest you turn this wacky shit straight off.
Greetings. Got a bit of an odd but fun one for you all tonight. First up, we thought it would be a good time to replay a fascinating interview we had with Rob The Undertaker. This goes back to Tales from the Space Pod, episode 310 from October of 2017. And he really pretty much answers all of our sick and curious questions about the process of what happens to our bodies when we die. What is the first thing to transpire once we get to one of these funeral homes? You will learn some shit, my friends, whether you want to or not. We're going to go right into that interview, and then immediately afterward, you will be hearing a brand new recording of my new game show for the Comet, Name That Shit, wherein the other hosts will be battling it out, testing their knowledge of movies. It's a good time, and if you haven't already seen it, there is video of the show on our How Bizarre Facebook page, so head over there to check that out if you want to see our big, fat, dumb, beautiful faces. Other than that, we should be back next week with some more Halloween-y, spooky shit. So we shall see you then.
Yeah, I'm here.
Greetings from the Space Pod, and welcome. Sorry we were a little bit late. We got a little gabby talking about gun control and murder, which ties right in to where we're going to go very soon. Now, Rob Goff, you are a Wenatchee, East Wenatchee native, yeah?
I am, yeah.
I want to preface this whole interview by saying we are essentially a bunch of insensitive drunks. So anything that we ask, feel free to say no comment, because you're a working professional, first of all. But what we're talking about is not just morbid or depressing or gross shit at times. But you worked in the Wenatchee Valley for many a year, and a lot of people that are friends of ours that listen to the show, it's possible they might be connected to some of the things that could come up with a discussion like this. So I want to be careful not to overstep any bounds. So I'll just sort of leave that up to you to steer us, keep us somewhere at least close to the ethical lane, which is new for us. We don't travel that lane very often. But first of all, what the hell gets a human being into the world of dealing with the dead? Did you have some sort of morbid fascination with it when you were young? How did this all start?
Honestly, I was working at one of the local grocery stores there as a courtesy clerk, and I have an uncle that is still there in Wenatchee, but he worked at the funeral home in their prearrangement department, and always joked with me as a teenager that he was gonna get me a job down there. And as it turned out, it was just kind of fate would have it. He called me one day needing a ride from the funeral home. So I went and picked him up. And unbeknownst to me, while I was driving down there, he was talking to the funeral director, explaining that I was interested in a job. So when I got there, it was basically like walking into an interview process.
Nice.
During the middle of all that, the phone rang, and it was the hospital, and it was somebody, a decedent at the hospital, that needed picked up. So the funeral director just kind of said, "Come with me. We'll see how you do with it." And we went through the process. We went to the hospital. We came back, and I actually sat through the embalming process. And then he convinced me that if my uncle and I drove the decedent up to Chelan, that he would buy us dinner afterwards. And so I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And
nothing works up an appetite like a
good
right. Stiff one. Am I right? Mm-hmm.
That's it. So that's really how it worked out. And it came when I got back. It was pretty much, we need help. Do you want a job? And it was like, well, I can push shopping carts through the snow this winter, or I can be inside. So I'll come to work, and I've been with it ever since.
I like that. It's just like any other job. There's an opportunity. You needed a job. Well, was there any stigma, especially early on when you were younger, about wanting to get in this kind of field? Did you find people looking at you like you were some sort of troubled creep?
It was really 50-50. Half the people that would talk with me about it were just overly excited and wanted to know every detail of it. And the other half, when they heard what I did, were kind of like, okay, see you later. I don't want to talk anymore. Mm-hmm. So it was really kind of 50-50 on that.
I think I remember, this is Lyle, I think I remember all the parties used to have it because ascending to the funeral home, there was a house that you lived in. It was like right in the same parking lot.
Yeah, we had a few of those, I would say.
Just a few. But yeah, there was a lot of fews.
Yeah.
So you lived in a little apartment on the property of the mortuary.
Yeah, there was a house associated with the property that I was able and fortunate to live in, and I've lived in funeral homes before, on and off. It's kind of nice, but in a way, because it's you're getting paid to live there, and in another way, it's not that nice because you don't really get a lot of time away from the place. If you want to take a break, you got to actually leave the house to get a break.
Yeah. Well, I suppose a lot of people might be curious about this process, and when they start some sort of apprenticeship, I suppose that is definitely the time to find out if you have the stomach for it. Was there an adjustment period for you? Because you weren't drawn to this industry. It was just an opportunity. So did you have to, did you have a barf bag phase, or were you just kind of in this to win this from the beginning?
Honestly, it's the process of being around decedents, in the preparation area and the embalming room. It's never really been an issue for me, even from the very first time I was back there. There's been some times where I've kind of had to take a step back and get a deep breath, but for the most part, it's never really been an issue to me with working around the deceased.
By the way, the decedents. How did I never think about that for a punk rock name when I was 13 years old? I don't think I knew that word.
The first thing I thought of was that's the opposite of our podcast, the Indecents.
Another great band name. I saw the Indecents open for the Decedents back in '92. And now we all have the Recedents. You get it? Well, one of us did. Do you know if is there college courses for this type of career, vocational training, or is this just one of those things where you learn from the dudes that were doing it before you?
Well, it's really both. Depending on where you want to go with it. If you want to be a funeral director, there are college courses and an internship that you got to complete, and then you take a state exam. And assuming you pass all those, then you can be a funeral director. If you want to be an embalmer, licensed embalmer in this state, at least in the state of Washington, you have to complete. You have to go and complete mortuary college at an accredited mortuary school, and then, of course, pass some national exams. There's also a 2-year internship that you need to complete prior to all that. But once you've had all that training, then they will get, once you pass your state exam, they will give you a license to be an embalmer.
Wow, mortuary school. So many great band names coming out of tonight's episode. Well, let's get down to brass tacks. Now, let's say I die tonight, and it's not a murder mystery or crime, but let's say it's a clear case of some sort of freak thing, like a brain aneurysm or whatever. Just lights out, and they send me off to the morgue. What adventure is my stone cold meat sack in for? Take us through that process.
Well, if you don't have a medical history that would create, an idea of what the cause of death was, then chances are the county coroner would investigate and most likely perform autopsy on you before releasing to a local funeral home. It really just depends. The coroner will get involved. The county coroner or the medical examiner would get involved with the death, assuming it's unattended, unexpected, no medical history, or if you're in the ER less than 24 hours. Of course, things like homicide, suicide, accident, deaths, things like that. The coroner does definitely get involved at that point. But if you were expected to pass, you had a pretty extensive medical history, and it was very obvious why you died, you would immediately be released to whatever funeral home your survivors elect to send you to. And then at that point, the survivors come into the funeral home to answer quite a number of questions with regards to what you would like to have done with the decedent. And That could be embalming with visitation. That could be cremation. It really depends on what the choices are of the surviving family members at that point.
Mm-hmm. So let's say they choose embalming. You just go straight to the showers. There's a cleaning process, I would imagine. Yeah. How does this all work? What happens next? I really want to get into the details. This is fascinating to me.
The embalming process, really, once there's permission, whether written or verbal permission from the next of kin, you're brought into the embalming room, or we call it the preparation room or the prep room. The process really is there's a bathing process that takes place with antiseptic soap, so a topical bathing, at which point we then will, if there's facial hair that it's pretty obvious that needs to be removed, that process is done. There's the next
fuck
step
this
is,
cunt and his sideburns.
That's right.
Congratulations, you're powder, bitch.
This guy's unibrow is just too much.
I'm going to stitch them together.
There's definitely questions asked, prior to, because it's certainly easy to shave somebody, easy enough, but it's very difficult to put the sideburns back. So
yeah,
we're going to make sure that it's appropriate to do that. But once that's done, we go through a process called setting of features, which is really almost a surgical process of making sure the eyes are closed. There's these, they're called eye caps. They look like large plastic contact lenses. And those will be placed on top of the eyeball itself with the eyelids closed around it, and those will hold the eyes closed. There's a process in the setting of features where we assure that the person's mouth remains closed. Yeah. That's done a couple of different ways, but I would say the majority of embalmers out there use what's called a needle injector, which is basically an injector gun that will drill a small little, looks like a little nail, almost like with a wire coming off of it. They'll put that into the bottom jaw in between the teeth, and then one in the top jaw.
Wow.
And then they'll actually close the mouth and tie the two wires together.
Oh, wow. That's fast.
Give me a minute. I got to barf. Then I'll be right back. Wow. I never thought. I guess I always assumed it was just some sort of glue. Like glue the lips together, glue the eyes together.
Sometimes it can be. Sometimes it has to be. It just depends on the decedent themselves. It depends on how well you can get their jaw to close. Sometimes they've been deceased long enough that they're kind of in the deep throes of rigor, which, you really can't. It makes moving of the joints, the joint in the jaw, for example, difficult to do. So you have to really kind of massage that through and release that rigor mortis that you hear people talk about.
Wow.
So do you ever have to get out the old saw? I mean, are we talking like something that's that lodged?
No, not typically. They'll use saws, of course, during the autopsy process, sure. But for what we do, we don't typically need any type of saw work. And then basically at that point, we're ready to start injecting. So, based off of the decedent, based off of what we know about the decedent, their cause of death, things like that, we'll create a chemical solution based out of we use formalin or formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is the gas stage of the chemical, but when it's aqueous, we use formalin. Or it's called formalin. We'll mix up a solution that we know will work with this individual based off of, their age, how long they've been deceased, how long they're going to be in visitation, things like that. So you kind of figure out all the different recipes based off of who you're working with. Have that mixing while we're what's called raising the vessels, which is essentially making an incision into the remains. Typically done through the right on the right side, typically above the collarbone, and we'll actually raise up through, kind of dissect through the muscle there, raise up the carotid artery and the jugular vein. Mm-hmm. At which point we place what's called a cannula into the carotid artery, which is essentially a metal tube that goes and is clamped in place, and the end of that metal tube is attached to through a hose is attached to the embalming machine. We'll inject the chemical into the carotid artery, and what happens is as the chemical is moving through the arterial system, it's putting the pressure onto the venous system and expelling the blood and bodily fluids that's in the venous system out through the jugular vein.
Oh, God, what a sight that must be.
It's a little strange the first or second time you see it.
That's something out of Dude Bro Party Massacre 3.
I was going to say you had to have like at least one bad go on that, right?
We got a gusher. We got a gusher.
Oh my gosh. There's been
the
times,
smells.
All sorts of things can happen, you know. If there's a blockage or if there's a breakage, even for that matter, of the arterial system, you have to figure out where it's at, and then from that point go below that blockage or breakage.
That's like plumbing.
It's raise
exactly
another
like
artery.
plumbing.
So, yeah.
Well,
exactly.
where does it go? What do you do with all that waste? Does it go down some special drain or into a big bucket?
It goes typically right down the table that the decedent is laying on into a tube at the bottom, and it eventually just goes right down into the sewage system.
Oh my God!
Are you kidding me? Our human
goes
essence,
my midnight sewer adventures
goes down to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I had no fucking idea.
Oh fuck!
This is already mind blowing and depressing, but beautiful.
What's in there?
Good Lord. What's worse, standing in someone's shit or someone's jizz, piss, and blood? Because you're talking like everything, yeah? You're draining everything.
You can, yeah. I mean, you know, when a person passes away, their muscles ease, the tension in their muscles, and so certainly various organs tend to release all sorts of bodily fluids to you sometimes.
Sometimes we do that when we're relaxed with a special friend, you know? Things happen. Oh, good Lord. Fucking fascinating. I would have guessed that all this stuff would have to be contained, but just right down in the sewage. Now, if someone's an organ donor, I guess all that's probably taken care of before they come to you, yeah? You just have more holes to work with? How's that work?
Well, it can be. It really depends on where you're at. The place I used to be at there in Ellensburg here recently, that was the funeral home, but it also doubled as the county morgue and the organ tissue donation area. So, you know, they weren't doing the major organ donations there, but they were doing a lot of the corneal donations, you know, with removing the corneas from the decedent to use for transplant. But yeah, essentially what happens is if you're preparing that decedent for visitation, you have to be able to seal all those incisions up. You have to be able to make them presentable.
You pop fake eyeballs in there, I'm guessing, and...
Well, not anymore. It used to be. We used to do a process called enucleation, which was removal of the entire eyeball to be used for corneal transplant. But the technology has gotten so good, and the technicians that perform that have gotten so good that now they just simply make a small incision in the eyeball and remove the cornea.
Wow.
And so the eyeball is actually still there. The actual eyeball is still there. But the cornea is missing.
So there's been a mystery. I have many a dead friend, many a dead relative. I've been to so many fucking funerals. I've seen many people who I know and love laying down there on that slab on the visitation. Are they wearing underwear? Are they wearing anything under? How fully do you dress these people?
You know what? We dress in whatever the family brings in. If they bring in undergarments, then yes. The most difficult thing to bring in to dress somebody in is shoes. But short of that, you know, if they bring in undergarments, whatever the case might be, any type of clothing they bring in, we will dress them in that.
Fascinating. What is there a different process from someone who's going to be buried versus cremation?
Yeah, you know, with cremation, a lot of people, in fact, the majority of people these days are not embalmed.
Yeah.
Embalming is not a state requirement. You don't have to have embalming done, which is one of the big misconceptions that go around with funeral service. You don't have to have embalming. So the majority of people are less and less embalmed these days than, when I first started. When I was 16 years old, 75, almost 80% of the people were being buried and embalmed, or being embalmed first, then buried. But today, the state average for cremation today is pushing 80% in Washington State. And
is that a cost thing? Is that like because it costs more to do that, or?
Cost is a factor for sure, because there is less cost with cremation. The other factors with that are various religions have now started opening the doors, if you will, to say, yes, we will allow for cremation. The other big factor, though, is the influx of cultures from all over the world that are moving into the state, that bring their culture from their home countries with them. And, embalming is really kind of an Americanized process.
Well, it's definitely unnatural.
Most places in the world don't have embalming. They still have burial, but they may not embalm.
Well, we have covered many a story on Tales from the Space Pod, and maybe you've even heard some. I haven't mentioned that Rob actually listens to the show, but of, kids being, waking up in the coffin at their own funeral, or not necessarily kids, but for some reason it seems to be kids a lot. And a lot of these are from third world countries where they don't have the technology, because a person can appear super fucking dead. We learned that when we watched Congo or Serpent in the Rainbow. You can appear dead and not be dead. And if you don't have state-of-the-art technology, or maybe even if you do, who knows? There's freakish things that happen. Have you ever heard of anything happening outside of a third world country, or something out in the hills where someone's, burying a loved one that just died from natural cause? Have you ever heard of any stories where someone is just like, hang on, gang, not quite dead. I'm actually getting better. Anything at all like that?
Those stories do persist, and it does happen even in non-third world countries. For example, a person that dies from hypothermia, if before they actually physically die from hypothermia, they almost appear very shallow breathing, very faint heartbeat, and there's been times where people have been pronounced dead, from falling in frozen ponds or whatever, that weren't dead. And when they get back to the hospital, or they get to the funeral home even, and eventually their core temperature warms to such, they start breathing again normally, their heart starts beating.
Nuts.
So it can happen, but there's certainly techniques in place to really confirm death. Obviously, the stethoscope and listening for the heartbeat. Put a mirror underneath the person's nose and mouth and see if there's any fog on the mirror. I mean, those are techniques that we use, but even with that, they're not 100%. Me personally, it's never happened to me, and thank goodness, because I don't know what I'd do if somebody started talking to me like that.
Just like,
hello, my baby. Hello, my honey.
Lay back down. You'll be stone dead in a moment. Holy snikes. Well, by the way, I'm a little alarmed that you're actually relying on stethoscopes and mirrors in 2017 to make doubly sure that I'm dead before putting me in the ground. But I guess tricks of the trade. Now, growing up, I always heard a lot of urban legends, and like any good urban legend, most of them were set in my own neck of the woods. But now that I'm older, I feel like I'm fairly positive most of these were just that, legends. But I have heard many people discovering or telling stories of funeral home workers discovering unsavory things going on in mortuaries or morgues, say like walking in on somebody doing something of a sexual nature transpiring. Now, again, you can say no comment, but do you find, obviously this shit happens to some degree, but have you had any kind of weird encounter where you walked in on anything, or you heard someone saying, holy shit, Harold, before you worked here, Harold, we got him cornholing so many decedents.
No, I've not, I've been in this profession for quite some time now, and no, I've never had any anything like that I've been a part of or seen. But certainly, there are stories. It unfortunately can happen if people are involved. Anything can happen. But that kind of stuff, when you hear about it, it does make pretty big headlines, national headlines. Fortunately, we don't see that all that often. But with people's ideas or thoughts, people can do just about anything. So it's an unfortunate thing because you're entrusted with the care and custody of the decedent. And it's an unfortunate thing that there's could be people out there. I'm not saying there are, but there could be people out there that maybe mentally are not. Shouldn't be there, I guess we could say. Don't have the right mindset to be there, and there could be things that happen, but I just am thankful that I've never been around it.
Well, some pedophiles get into, teaching grade school to be around kids, and some rapists get into positions of being authoritarian figures so that they have this power over people. I guess it's just another situation like that. Lyle, you had something you wanted to say?
I got one of the most juvenile questions that I could probably ask tonight, but it's about like the deceased. Is it true that sometimes when a man passes, that sometimes he can still pitch a tent like afterwards?
Vigor mortis is what we call it.
Stiffy.
Yeah, stiffy.
Honestly,
the SS. Mm-hmm. All aboard the
to be
SS.
honest with you, Lyle, it can happen, and it has happened. It usually happens though during the embalming process. If it happens, it's during the embalming process because typically what that means is you have what's called your rate of flow, how fast the chemical is moving through the arterial system. You have a higher rate of flow than what you really want, and so just like natural occurring, it will increase.
That's awesome. I didn't know if it was true or not.
Yeah.
Well,
it also depends too, though. That's another topic. It also really everything with embalming depends on how soon after the death the embalming takes place. If a person's been deceased longer, maybe 24 hours before the embalming starts, typically you won't see something like that take place. But if they're deceased for 2-3 hours and you start the embalming process, there can be all sorts of things that take place.
Yeah. Well, we took to Facebook earlier to ask any of our listeners and friends if they had any questions, and we got a couple, and one of them, I think it would be a good time to bring it up now, is, when you have this corpse in front of you, some of it's completely dead, some of it may be still dying, some of it is in all sorts of states, and there's nerves and there's natural responses and there's things swelling up and shrinking. How often do you run into things like farts and belches? And we've talked about troubling leakage, shall we say? Are you just ever working with these things and they just get you a fucking face full of dead fart? Oh God, what a fucking thought.
Farts and belches, any type of gas, it's pretty common. It's pretty common because through the digestive tract, the gases are building up. There's a process at the end of the embalming that we do to help subside that. But, before that process is done, gases are forming and they've got to go somewhere. And so, people typically will release gas in one form or another. People urinate, people defecate. It's
what a pathetic thought.
Yeah, it's really
we're just naked on a fucking metal slab with a stranger doing some stuff to us, and we're just peeing all of a sudden.
I'd like to see that as an alternate cover to the Everybody Poops coloring book.
Every corpse pees. That's the Halloween version of Everybody Poops. I'd read Every Corpse Pees.
I'd read them.
with the embalming process, after you're done with the chemical injection into the arterial system, the next process is what we call aspiration. And basically what that is a large, probably 1.5 foot long wand, metal wand that has a razor at the end. It's hollow and it's connected to a suction of some sort, whether it's a hydrosuction or electric. It's connected to a pump. We'll insert that tube through the abdomen right above the navel. And we kind of just move that all around throughout the inside of the remains it punctures all those internal organs, but it helps to release all that gas and any kind of fluid that's still in there.
Wow.
So,
okay, be honest. Some of this might be a little, extreme version, but a little akin to popping a zit, right? I mean, what is your favorite part of doing this entire process? Like you see my corpse coming off the table, you roll me onto your, into your lab or whatever, you're ready to rock. How about this? What's the one thing you're looking forward to the most of the whole process? And one thing you're looking forward to the least?
Well, it's probably not the greatest answer, but what I look forward to the most actually really doesn't even deal with the deceased. It's dealing with the living, but dealing with the deceased is the big part. It is a big part. I don't really think I have a favorite part of dealing with the deceased. I think probably my favorite part is actually contemplating things about them, how they died, how they lived, kind of their life story. I mean, you see some people that some of their history that come across the preparation table there, and you can kind of stop and think, wow, this person created programs that we're using on the computer today, and so that's really my favorite part of it.
Interesting.
My least favorite, I would say, probably is a lot of the repair work that gets done. I mean, it's interesting to me. It can be exciting, but it is definitely time-consuming and very tiresome.
Like from wounds or autopsy openings.
It can be traumatic wounds. It could be autopsy, donation. There's a lot of repair work that goes with certain types of donation, and an example was a gentleman, not in this state, but a different state that I worked, passed away, and he had everything. He had the donation, he had the autopsy, he had the trauma from the reason he passed. And I actually spent 3 days just with this person, repairing him to get him to a point that his family could come in and see him. And
wow.
I'm pretty tired after that was done, but it was, for me, all that tired went away when the family was able to go in and they spent 15 minutes with them, and then we took them to the crematory. But it was that 15 minutes that was worth the 3 hours.
As someone who, again, has been to a lot of funerals, and anyone has been to a funeral, one, the visitation thing on paper is sort of nuts, but like you expect them to open their eyes or sit up. It's the weirdest fucking thing. And it's never not weird. Like, you only see a person moving, even if I don't care how still they sleep, even when they're playing around or whatever, you only see them moving to some degree. So when they're completely still for 10, 15 minutes, it really drives the whole process home. And I think it's a very important thing. And when somebody looks bad, it can be very distressing. And when someone looks as good as they possibly could, it's not like a yay moment, but it really makes it less traumatic, and then you can just focus on the other horrible things that are part of seeing someone that you adore stone cold dead. A weird and probably greatly underappreciated art of making somebody look well or look. Good Lord, you don't know this person. You're probably given photos, am I right? Are you given photos or maybe videos about this person when they're alive to match their look?
Yeah, sometimes. A lot of times, though, you're just kind of going on guesswork.
That's tough because you don't know their smirk. You don't know their own muscles are not working. You know, we carry ourselves. We don't think about it, but we carry ourselves in a way that is sort of like a habit. Like sometimes we always are just kind of like squinting a little, or some of us are always smiling, some of us are always frowning. When all those muscles are dead, it's easy for us to be unrecognizable. It took me a few funerals to realize that. But then there's also the complexion thing, you know, when we can't possibly have our same complexion when we're 4 days dead. So you got to match that. And that's tough to match. By the way, how often does your family watch My Girl? That's got to be a regular in your household,
He
right?
can't see without his glasses.
It's a lovely film.
Quite a number of times.
It's
and
a
actually,
lovely film.
It's surprising you bring it up, though. I'll say out of almost everything I've seen on TV or movies, that's probably one of the most realistic versions of this profession that's out there. Is My Girl.
That's interesting.
Most of them are so far, Hollywoodized.
Yeah.
That it just doesn't even make sense.
Well, Rob, you were originally supposed to be here, as we mentioned last week, but we had the horrible shooting in Las Vegas. And as I mentioned, we both agreed we should sit on this one for a week. But in your response, you mentioned that you have some interesting insight on this type of thing, where all of a sudden a county or a specific district or town is overwhelmed with an inordinately large amount of bodies to deal with. I'm really curious as to what the protocol for this type of emergency scenario would be.
Well, you know, most townships, most counties do have some sort of disaster management team that's in place. I've been on a few of those in the past. Unfortunately, though, you can never prepare yourself for a disaster because you have no idea what that disaster is going to be. You can only use what's happened in history to make your preparations. And, you know, in a town, let's use Wenatchee there. If something like this, like what took place, not even at the same scale, but, you know, what took place in Las Vegas happened in Wenatchee, there's only so many places available to hold human remains. You know, you've got the funeral homes and you've got the hospital there. The hospital can't hold everybody. The funeral, you know, so they'll call on the funeral homes a lot of times to help. But if it's bigger than that, then, you know, really the only thing you're left with, and what a lot of people do, which fortunately they don't typically show this on the news, is they'll bring in the refrigerated trailers, you know, that you see out passing you on the interstate.
Wow.
Wow. What a thought when you're passing one of those semis.
Yeah, you never know what's inside. But a lot of times they'll use that, you know, and where I'm at here in Spokane County, that's part of the emergency protocol, depending on the size of the emergency. But again, how do you prepare for something unless it's happened and able to use that? You have no idea. So, you know, there are things in place that you can do, but a lot of times it just reverts back to that, pulling that tractor trailer in and
just storing them.
Store people in there until we can get to them. You know, you gotta that morgue, the morgue already is probably 3/4, if not completely full by the time the disaster comes in. And now you're bringing in, you know, 58 people on top of what they already have to identify, to determine cause of death, to release, you know, to funeral homes or whoever they're going to. It's a very, very overwhelming process.
How much space does a city like Wenatchee have for corpses?
It's been a little while since I've been in there, but when I was there the last time, at least in the county or in the morgue at the hospital, I believe there was about 4 to 5 spaces in the refrigeration unit there.
Wow, not many.
But
that's pretty small.
Yeah, not many. And typically funeral homes, you know, will have a refrigeration unit that's anywhere from 3 to 5, you know, that will hold 3 to 5 people. Depending on the size of the funeral home. So yeah, it can really be tremendous. Now, certainly bigger funeral homes, when I was in Wenatchee, I went from a funeral home that had what's called a 3-person cooler to a funeral home that had a 175-person cooler. So, it's an eye opener depending when get into larger cities.
It was a rumor going around that you actually did, or at least helped with the death of Kurt Cobain. Was that a rumor? Or?
Well, let's rephrase it. I didn't help with the death of Kurt.
No.
How much did Courtney pay you, Rob?
My bad.
I was at the funeral home that he came to after his death. I did take part in some aspects of the funeral ceremony that did take the private funeral ceremony that took place, and I was part of the cremation process. Oh, but short of that, I was there, but I was kind of, everybody that was on staff was basically there because of
who he was.
The fact that this was a celebrity, if you will.
Sure. Did you ever see the alleged autopsy photo of Kurt Cobain, Rob?
No, I didn't.
It was basically shoulders and some shredded meat on top of it. Would you call that an accurate depiction?
I would say no.
Yeah. Most people seem to think that autopsy photo is fake.
Yeah. I can't go into a lot of detail with it, but I can tell you that there was, some opportunity for family and close friends to come and pay respects and say goodbye.
Yeah.
And so, I would say a lot of what you see surrounding that is kind of questionable.
Bullshit. Sure. Yeah. Well, Christopher brought up a story a while back about a zombie foot, as we called it, that popped out of a neighboring grave during someone's funeral. Horrifying photo, and yet fucking hilarious. Now, is this possible? Tell us what happens to the body or the coffins themselves in the ground, because my understanding is these things are supposed to be built to last a good chunk of time, although who knows when this foot was buried. It could have been 100 years ago, and that would just be wood rotting in the ground. But how would that be in the olden times versus now? Like how long? Well, let's start with the olden times. These things that were buried in wooden coffins are probably just out in dirt right now, yeah? Essentially,
yeah. Before most of the cemeteries started requiring outer burial containers to bury caskets in the grave, the casket was put directly into the ground. And, most of the time they were wood or really thin metal. And with the weight of the earth above, plus the periodic equipment that drives across the surface, a lot of times those ended up collapsing. Mm-hmm. And that collapse, of course, creates that big sinkhole that you hear about all the time with cemeteries. And so cemeteries have really started pushing to use those outer burial containers to prevent that collapsing. The picture that you were referring to, I did see a copy of it myself, and based just off solely looking at the picture, it was apparent that the decedent that was in the grave, that had been there for, I think it was 60 years, they said, was not in any sort of outer burial container and appeared to have a wood casket based off of the close-ups I looked at. Mm.
So that's something that totally could have happened then.
Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. I don't think it's very likely, because that collapse most likely would have taken place years ago, and just based off of the condition of what I saw, at least in the picture I saw, it seemed to me like it wasn't there for 60 years as they were claiming, or it was, staged. But, who am I to say? I'm not the expert on it. I've been a part of many disinterments and seen people that have been deceased that long. And what I've seen is much different than what was in the picture.
Yeah, it seemed like there's a lot of foot left, right? Is that what you're saying? Like it?
Yeah.
Would it be way more gone?
Yeah. And, you got to think too, there's a lot of, water that gets into the graves, and certainly water and just the elements that are in the earth help the decomposition process. And to me, it seemed that there was a lot of tissue that was still left with the the foot in question than what there should have been for somebody that's been, in a grave that, if I remember right, was in the Midwest, that goes through, the hot summer heat and the bitter cold winters and the ice and the thawing of the ice, and of course all the water that trickles down through the surface, plus the water table itself that rises and lowers in the ground. To me, it seemed like there was quite a bit of extra tissue that maybe shouldn't have been there, plus as well as clothing and various other things.
Yeah. No, so what about the modern coffins, like something that we spend a few grand on minimum? I mean, there's no ceiling to how expensive these things can get, but they're a chunk of dough, and I think we buy them with some sort of idea that we will be preserved, and we get embalmed with some sort of idea that we will be preserved. But ultimately, how long is that supposed to last?
It's interesting because some of the caskets that are sold actually do have warranty cards in them.
They'll last, well, who's supposed to claim them shit?
Right, like it's a selling point. Buy this one; it's got a 75-year warranty.
Oh, it's hilarious. I like that.
Really
confidence.
It depends on what you're trying to determine too. How long will the remains last? How long will the casket last? There are so many determining factors.
Yeah, one leads to the next, I suppose.
Yeah, how well the embalming was done. What type of casket was the person placed into? What type of seal, if it was sealed or non-sealed, outer burial container. And then the ground itself, the hot desert ground, like in the Southwest, for example. Look at Egypt, for example, where the desert's really hot. Those guys have been around for eons, and we can still examine them. Whereas somebody that is in real swampy ground or ground that's really hot and then really cold, people tend to decompose much, much quicker. So there's just so many different factors.
Go
ahead.
There's a really fascinating story of somewhere in Europe where they discovered a tomb that was basically like their dead bodies there, and it went all the way back. I want to say to the Crusades, and some of the bodies there were still intact because of this certain environment that they were living in. It was really, really interesting. It was a documentary.
Oxygen is really the worst thing for you after you're deceased, which is ironic to say because you're not breathing oxygen, but it will, an oxygenated environment increases the rate of decomposition tremendously. And so removal of the oxygen in that area, with like, say, ice, for example, if you're frozen in ice, there's people that have been in snow slides that have been frozen and found hundreds of years later, and they look just like the day they died. From the lack of the oxygen that helps to decompose the remains.
What am I thinking of? It's a giant mountain. People have died on it.
Everest.
Mount Everest. There's people that go up to the top, and they've actually taken pictures of there's deceased that are still up there.
They use them as mile markers, even.
Yes.
They're like old green boots. I read an article about that the other day. Like there's a guy with green boots that has died up there, and they call them old green boots.
Yeah.
Like they know they've reached a certain point when they see old green boots.
It's nuts.
Weird.
Rob, have you ever seen anything that you couldn't explain, like that might lead you to believe in something on a spiritual or a paranormal level?
Well, I'm not saying that there's not some sort of spiritual connection. I have never personally witnessed it, actually seen like a ghost, if you will.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that have in places that I've been. I've had experiences where things have been unexplained. An example of that was a funeral home that I worked in down in Southwest Washington that was undergoing renovations, and it was an old 100-year-old building, so they were cutting through the rock walls and things, and we were constantly having to vacuum, and we could get done vacuuming and go. This is when I lived in the apartment up at the very top floor of it. We would vacuum to the top steps, walk into the apartment and set the alarm. And in the morning when we got up, we would, to go, that's when I was in mortuary college, got up to go to school, turn the alarm off, and the alarm would tell you that there was no activity, meaning nobody had turned it off or anything like that, or there'd been no movement or anything in the building.
Right.
You'd walk back down to where you had vacuumed the night before, and you could see footprints in the brand new carpet walking in and out of all the rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, boy.
And so, there was the preparation room in that particular location was in the basement. And this was a 4-story building. So to get from the basement to the actual apartment, you had to go up 4 flights of stairs. And I was in there late one night working with a decedent, and it had a big, those fire doors, those big metal heavy doors.
Oh, yeah.
With it has the little kickstand for the door stop to keep it open. And I had the door open. But all of a sudden the door closed on me, which I thought was odd. I thought, well, maybe, the little rubber stopper or something was new and slid across the newly polished concrete, and that was fine, nothing big. But then it wasn't too much long after that the door actually completely opened back up again on me too. And that's when I set the track record for getting from the basement to the top floor.
That's when you went home and watched My Girl.
Yeah.
Oh, bees. Such a simpler enemy. They only go after kids.
Actually, same people. Coincidentally, in that same place, I had a roommate that was also a student there with me, and his daughter was over to visit one weekend, and I was sitting in the apartment watching TV, and they walked in and asked me, how did I get into the apartment so quickly and change out of my suit? And I couldn't understand what they were saying. Well, they started describing the story to me, and they were actually walking from the main floor up to the second floor, and it was one of those staircases where you kind of go up, and then you turn and go up, and then you turn and go up again. So it does kind of a 180-degree turn. And as they made that first turn, they looked to that third level, and they saw, or they claimed they saw, somebody they thought was me walking into one of the visitation rooms, which was dark, thinking I was going to jump out and spook them. And so they snuck up to the room and jumped into the room and flipped the lights on, and there was nobody there, but they swore they saw somebody that looked very similar, at least in stature and size and things to me, walking into that room. Both of them saw that. And, I never saw anything, but there were certainly strange things that took place.
Yeah. Well, as someone who has seen just about everything you can probably imagine a body doing or experiencing post-life, are you a strong cremation guy, or do you want to be buried? Do you have any concerns knowing what you know now, or do you have specific instructions knowing what you know now, how to be handled after the old ticker stops?
Well, for me, I think, and it's only my personal opinion, but I think I want to be buried, and I want to have a solid oak casket because, quite frankly, I'm a larger person, larger guy, and of course those oak caskets, they're another 300 pounds. So I really want my pallbearers to earn their keep when they carry me.
We can work for it.
Oh, man.
That's right.
I died for this, bitch. Come on.
Carry me, bro. What, you can't fucking...
Yeah.
Dude, do you even lift? Well, we have one other Facebook question, unless I missed some, from Brandy. And this kind of goes along the same line. She asks, how sure are you that the bodies you're dealing with don't feel anything during the process?
Well, that's a good question. Nobody's ever said anything to me, so that's one thing.
All right.
Yeah.
But, actually, it is a good question because I don't know how you would actually explain it. When you die, your brain function stops, your heart stops, you're dead. You're clinically dead. There are still, cells and the molecular side of things in the body that are still struggling, and they don't just die instantly as well. And so, for example, if you start an embalming process on a decedent that has just very recently passed away, and I'm talking, within an hour or two after they passed, as you're injecting that chemical into the arterial system, some of those cells are still fighting for life, still trying to hold on, and so they can, clench, or they can even move and cause some of the, I've seen fingers that have kind of started moving and things.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always the old wise tale about, I walked into the preparation room, and just as I opened the door, the guy sat up, and that's never really happened that I'm aware of. But people can move, and really what that is those cells trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Rigor mortis is another example of the cells trying to stay alive, and what that is really the muscular cells are dying from lack of oxygen, and as they do, they're moving and clenching those muscles, which is what's causing that stiffness in the joints.
Yeah. I remember reading some manuscript on death when I was a gothy teenager, and it was something about an execution that had taken place in medieval time, and it was recorded that after they lopped this dude's head off, he spent about 5 to 15 seconds. His hands were like trying to find where his head went. Like they were like feeling around, like tapping the giant gaping gushing hole where his head was just severed from his person. And he stood there for a little bit, and it disturbed the king or the lawmaker. I can't remember the exact details. It disturbed him so much that he banned executions, because he's like, holy shit, that's gross. And it's just like, and it couldn't be anything more than that, right? It's just like your body is like, hey, oops, no, that's creepy. It was like, I was alive literally half a second ago. I'm still alive as far as parts of me know, right? It's just like pawing. I mean, that's an extreme example. By the time you're ever seeing them, they've been gone for days.
I'm pretty sure there's like scientific facts too. Like when you're decapitated, like your brain still functions for not that long.
There's been research on that. That's creepy. Yeah.
Enough synapses in the brain to kind of function enough for the eyes and shit to move around.
Yeah, blink and shit.
Try to see something, let the jaw kind of. But then,
well, it's kind of goes back to that old adage of running around like a chicken with your head cut off.
Yeah.
It's really kind of the same thing. That the nerves are still sending impulses. They're just not getting to the brain, and vice versa. So if you're brain dead, then would you feel anything? Probably not, because there's no way for the brain to register that as pain or some sort of sensation. But yeah, it can happen where things are still moving immediately afterwards.
I just want to ask, what do you think the biggest misconception about your job is?
I think a lot of people think, we're ghouls that sit back in the morgue and just wait for people all day long. Ambulance chasers. I think the biggest misconception, though, is a lot of people don't take the time while they're living to really investigate and base their ideas and thoughts on, what they've seen in the past or what they've heard. Funeral directors and embalmers are people, they're there to support the community. They're there to serve the community. And, they're not the morgue rats that you think that they are. They really want to put the effort and time in to help a family. And if you ask, a funeral director, why do you do what you do? Why would you do this? These are people that are missing, their own family's birthday parties, Christmases, to help other people. They'll answer the same way. We're here to serve the public. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is why we actually do what we do, or, the focus just on the actual decedent themselves. Honestly, 90% of our job is with the living.
Yeah, you sort of hinted at that earlier, and that changed my whole opinion on this whole process. Is like, it is this thing where you are surrounded by death, and yet everything you are doing, like literally everything you're doing is for the living. We could just quite easily snip out the useful bits, like we do with the roast chicken, and toss out the rest. We could do that, but it really is the process and the ceremony and the thoughtfulness and the preparation that is all down to the living. And like I said, it is a service that I would imagine is grossly underappreciated and very misunderstood. I'm glad that Chris phrased that question that way, because I'm sure that, I mean, my very first question was like, what got you into this, creep? Essentially. And I'm sure a lot of people have that feeling. It's like, what you see some sort of horror movie, and like, I'm drawn to death? No, you needed a job, you had an opportunity, you got into it, and you sort of grew into it. Probably how it goes a lot of the time. I'm sure there's some people that are interested in it, but I would wager that a good chunk of those people would be surprised. They probably get in there and they're the first ones to vomit in the garbage can. I was like, ew, I may be goth, but I'm not goth. Oh, how about them shits right there? Write that down. Write that down. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I would encourage people, if they do want to know what it's about, walk into a funeral home. Walk into many funeral homes. Mm-hmm. And some of them are pretty antiquated, and, that's because funeral directors have a really hard time with change. So a lot of times you can walk into funeral homes and it's like stepping back into 1968.
Yeah.
Some of them are very elaborate, very modern.
Very chic. Yeah, I've seen.
Very chic. But, just walk in and start asking some questions that, I've never met a funeral director yet, and I've been all over the state. I was the president of the state association for a while, so I traveled from funeral home to funeral home. I've never met a single one that wasn't willing to sit down and answer questions, even provide a tour of the funeral home, take you into places that most of the time the general public doesn't go. Mm-hmm. But if you ask, they'll take you back if they're able to, and show you places like the preparation room, show you the crematory, answer those questions. And, it all comes down to education. I mean, as funeral directors, that's one of the biggest parts of our duties, is to educate the public on what the options are available to them.
Yeah.
And then, let them make the choice on what option they want to use.
Is it an industry that seems to have a shortage, or is it doing pretty well? I mean, are you always looking for new people to get into? Because I could see it going either way.
Well, considering the death rate is still 100%, I think we're going to be around.
Not a bad business to bet on.
We're going to be around for quite some time. But, it does have, some of the older funeral homes are dying off. And
that's
primarily,
the thing. I see them going away, yeah.
What is it, like Blockbuster's dying away? Are we moving to a digital age?
Now we just have apps. But, yeah, what's happening? Most of it, I think what I'm seeing is business mergers. But, yeah, what's changing? What could possibly change?
There's actually a lot of new things coming out. There's legislation there's people trying to get legislation passed right now in the state of Washington to allow for different forms of disposition. One, for example, is a process called alkaline hydrolysis. There's people trying to get that passed currently in the state. Of course, things like green burial is another big thing that a lot of people are commenting on these days.
That, yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, green burial is basically the oldest form of disposition that's out there. Essentially, you go dig a grave and you put somebody in it.
Yeah, fertilizer. That's the old joke, pushing daisies, literally pushing daisies.
Yeah, it's not a new concept, but it is because we're putting the word green in front of it. It's now becoming kind of the popular thing to do.
We're such hipsters. Is it legal for someone like if old Gramps dies? Is it legal for me to just bury him in the old backyard?
It is. It's a pretty
really.
It's a pretty drawn out process. I mean, you have to designate that portion of the backyard as a cemetery.
Wow.
And from that point forward, it has to be designated as a cemetery.
Oh, wow.
I would have bet an easy no on that question. That is fucking fascinating.
Well, I just worked with the funeral director here recently that actually just went through that process. It took him and the family just about a full month to get all the permits necessary. But once it was done, they went out to the family farm and buried their loved one out on the family farm.
I imagine there would be some sort of limitations, like I don't know, city limits or close to a natural water supply. Who knows? I mean, it seems like there'd be some restrictions that make sense, but fucking fascinating to know that you could at least try. Because that was always a running gag in my family. Just conk me on the noggin and bury me under the swing. Like, yeah, that's cheap, but well, crazy.
Yeah, there's all sorts of new things. So, like I say, I mean, that new legislation they're trying to pass, alkaline hydrolysis, that's another big new process that's starting to come on, and we're really it's. They basically will dissolve the human remains just down to the skeletal remains, and then essentially flush everything that was dissolved away.
Just like Breaking Bad.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a gross
the exact
scene.
same process.
Is there talk? I mean, is there truth to this thing where some of the bigger cities are running out of space, so they're talking about stacking corpses, stacking coffins? Or is that, have I heard wrong?
Depends on where you're at. Back east, there's a really big land shortage. You get out here where we're at, out in the west, and especially in the northwest, there's more land than we know what to do with.
Yeah.
I worked at a cemetery that had 40 developed acres of cemetery that still had about a third of that still needing to be used before they opened up the additional 500 acres that they had just sitting there. There is stacking, though, of remains. That's a pretty popular thing, and it's really up to the cemetery if they want to allow that. But essentially, with that, you would, if you had like a husband and wife, for example, the first person is buried at what they call a double depth grave. Mm-hmm. And then when the second person passes, they go down and place the other person on top. So it's pretty common. It just depends on if the cemetery will allow it or not. Some cemeteries do. Some don't want to get involved with that because there's a lot of added labor that goes with that.
Sure. Got to dig twice as deep. Do you literally have to go twice as deep, or is it just a few
pretty
more
much,
feet?
Yeah.
Is it 10 feet or 6 feet? What's the stat? What's the there?
The old tale is always 6 feet deep, but the reality is the state says you have to have 18 inches of dirt between the top of the outer burial container and the surface of the ground. So as long as you have that 18 inches, you might be 5 feet, you might be 8 feet. It just depends on the ground you're digging in.
That's fun. That's exactly what the crawl space requirement is too.
Ironically, I don't believe in coincidences. Any experience or anything that you saw or something interesting like that you'd like to throw out before we get out of here?
Well, one thing that in 27 years of being in this profession, it's taught me is life is extremely fragile, as you guys know.
Sure.
And you would, when you stop and think about all the different people that I've been around or that I've seen that have passed away, it just amazes me how many ways there are that people can actually, their life can end, either very peacefully to extremely tragically. By their own hand or by somebody else's hand or an accident. It's just amazing how many different ways there are for people to pass away. And what's interesting is it really only falls under the 5 categories known as the manner of death. Their cause of death falls under manner of death, which is, with manner, what I mean by that is the 5 manners would be homicide, suicide, accident, unexpected and unattended, natural. But within those categories, anything you can think of. Just a guy sitting there enjoying life on the city park, and a bee comes by and stings him, and that's the end of it. To a person that's stepped in front of a freight train. I mean, it's just crazy to think how many ways there are for people. And I guess that's why that TV show is out there. What is it, 101 Ways to Die or something?
Right.
a lot of those are it's a lot of those are actual stories that have, well, I guess they're all stories that have happened, but it's really amazing to sit there and see the aftermath of that and to know what transpired to get to that point.
Has it I mean, you don't have to get into any details, but has it changed the way you look at any type of afterlife or any kind of, beyond this realm? Has it impacted you in one way or the other, or are you pretty much business as usual?
Well, yeah, I grew up in a fairly religious family, so I always had some, faith instilled in me from a very small age. Mm-hmm. But as I've been in this profession as long as I have, quite frankly, I really don't know how I could do it without having a belief in something. Mm-hmm. Because it just seems to me, the idea, and again, it's just my own personal belief, but it just seems to me that if you have some sort of faith in something, then no matter what's in front of you, you have that hope. No matter what you're looking at or working with, that decedent that you're working with, you have some hope that, they are hopefully in a better spot.
Yeah.
But, I know people that have, no belief in anything and it's just kind of, well, they're dead. So that's that. Mm-hmm. And to me, some
people would see that as hope. It's interesting how it's all about obviously your upbringing and your ultimate outlook, but it is interesting how some people see the lights out scenario as hope. It certainly could be a lot worse, right? There's a lot of ideas and theories a lot worse than lights out, but yeah, interesting that so you wouldn't say necessarily it's had any kind of change, but you've used your already existing faith in something to sort of help you through it or make sense of it.
It helps me to make sense of it. What's interesting, though, is because you are dealing with so many different faiths, it's kind of fun for me to sit back and watch how everybody, all these different faiths look at the same thing that you're looking at and maybe have the same thought or maybe have a complete opposite thought, but they have a thought that there's something that's happening, whether it's just that lights out, as you say, or if there's an afterlife or, whatever. It's interesting to see how other people go about that.
That is interesting. Because we talk about that. That's the great equalizer, right? Death. Mm-hmm. We can differ on politics, religion, whatever God we pray to. All that can be completely foreign from one to the next. And yet the great equalizer, I bet that would be an interesting insight and probably offer you some empathy and compassion to some of those other beliefs that maybe you wouldn't have already had. Certainly, the average Joe would never get a glimpse into. I mean, is there any other time where you need that belief system more than when you're grieving? So fascinating thought.
Well, man, that's a heck of a job to do, man, and for doing it for so long, man. It's a noble job.
I think so too. Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's been something I've done my entire life. I don't see myself or even imagine myself really doing anything else. I just love what I do. For me, it's fun because you never know what your day holds. You can make schedule after schedule and try to keep it, but you never know when that phone's going to ring or who's going to walk through that door and where your day is going to lead you. I mean, you can have, you go to, let's say you have 2 or 3 funerals that you're attending in a day. And, one can be of the Jewish faith, one could be of the Muslim faith, and one could be of the Catholic faith, for example. And it's just amazing to see all the differences and to try to work through all those on the same day or at the same time.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a unique position. It's a unique job, and just the stories and the people's lives that you get to be involved with throughout this are just tremendous. The stories of, from war heroes to, people, like I say, people that have created all sorts of different programs and equipment that we use today. And you're seeing the person there.
Yeah.
Or working with the family of that person. So it's really an exciting job.
Yeah. And you would get an exclusive glimpse into how much of a mark we can all leave with our lives that we would never see, right? You get to see that on a constant basis. Well, thank you so much, Rob. This has been everything I hoped and more. It's been spooky, creepy, gross, funny, and poignant, for the love of God. What more could you hope in 2 hours of Tales from the Space Pod? So thank you so much for joining us. Come back anytime. I'd love to have you back on sometime, maybe just to play news quiz. Let's see how a mortician can handle a round of news quiz. Maybe as we get closer to Halloween. We got some surprises coming up for Halloween soon, so we'll be in touch soon.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much, man. Rob. First, we have Christopher F. Hart on the top of the quite sexual pyramid round tire.
Hello.
Counterclockwise, we have Lyle the Crippler Thompson.
Howdy, howdy.
And then rounding us out is John No Nickname Pitts. I guess the nickname should have been in between Mark and Pitts. You guys are the very first. This is exciting because I want your immediate and after feedback to see how good of an experience this was for you or how terrible. But let's jump right into it. So round one is simply name that shit. Now we're going to go to the Select-O-Matic, who will select a category and the points that you will all be playing for. This machine takes 3 days to start, and you don't want to know what it runs on. Oh, this is exciting already. Tom Cruise movies, and you are playing for a point. So, okay. Here's the thing.
I wish I was playing for $1 million. I'm an expert.
That bodes well for you, because what you need to do is name as many Tom Cruise films in 30 seconds as you can. Here's the thing. You're going to start the bidding, and then it's going to move on to Lyle. So how many films are you confident that you could name starring Tom Cruise in 30 seconds?
12.
12 in 30 seconds. Wow. Intriguing. Okay. So Lyle, this goes to you. Do you think you can do 13 or more, or would you like to tell Christopher to name that shit?
It's a tough one. I mean, we could go through sequels, we could do some stuff, but I don't know if I'm that much of a fan to do 12.
Let me say this. Sequels only count if you can name their addendum title. You're not going to get away with this part 1, part 2, part 3 bullshit.
This would have been useful information.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Okay. With that in mind, let's back it up.
I adjust my number.
Let's back it up. It goes back to Chris. So does that make sense? Like, you can't get away with Friday the 13th, part 1, 2, and 3, and like, that's 3, bitches.
Right. Because you only got 30 seconds.
But part 4, I think part 4 on, they start naming them, right? So if you get those extra names, the subtitles, whatever that's called, that counts.
That's adjacenting.
I'm gonna go to. I'm gonna say 7.
Okay, that's still a lot to me.
I think under the pressure of being such a virgin game, I think Chris is gonna actually have a little freeze up. So I'm gonna have you name that shit, son.
It's entirely possible. Baby. It is entirely possible under the pressure of the 30-second clock, which, by the way, starts right now.
Legend, Cocktail, Born on the 4th of July, Mission Impossible, Oblivion. What am I at?
5 and 20 seconds.
Harry Maguire. You got me.
Oh, don't joke. 10 seconds.
Tropic Thunder. He's in that.
No, good poll.
7. Ding.
All right, you did it. But you see what can happen. As soon as that clock gets ticking, you only had 7 seconds left.
And I had lots to pull from, man. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Jerry Maguire. Or some
I think that is a good one to start with. Okay, so Christopher is on the board with the point.
Boom, shakalaka.
Rocking and rolling. Up next, we're going to see what the Select-O-Matic has in store for Lyle. Let's sit back and watch. And Oh, this is interesting. Well, this might be good for Lyle. This is Chris Farley movies for 2 points. Now, how many Chris Farley movies do you think you can name in 30 seconds, Lyle? This is an odd one because there aren't a ton. Well, that's where you start, because it'll go to John Mark after that.
The thing is I'm not a huge movie buff when it comes to this stuff like this. I
disagree. I think you've seen a shit ton of movies.
So, but yeah, but this, a century ago. So
yeah,
I'm going to go literally a 3. John Mark, I think you can do it.
Okay, John Mark, do you think you can name more than 3 Chris Farley movies?
Honestly, right now, I don't think I can.
Oh, shit, Lyle.
Oh, so Lyle's going to have to name that shit? Is that what you're telling us?
Better get off IMDb.
All right, Lyle, you got 30 seconds to name that shit, and it starts right now.
I got Tommy Boy. What about the Peanut and the Asteroid? Joe Dirt, was he in Joe Dirt? No,
was he? No, he's not.
Was he in? He had to have been in like Adam Sandler movies, yeah. The whole Saturday Night Live shit.
10 seconds.
You can do it.
Yeah.
You only need 2.
Yeah, no, I can't. I'm having that brain for it, and that's it.
And that's time. Okay, so now we're going back. All right, well, that's a bummer because that means you lost 2 points. That's I can't be blamed. That's the Select-O-Matic. That is the two-edged sword of the Select-O-Matic, because you get excited if you get more than 1 point, but you also lose more than 1 point if you go down. So
just wait till we get to the no pants round, Lyle.
I'm already there. Didn't you guys start there? We're moving on to John Mark. This is the final play of round 1. So let's go to the Select-O-Matic and see what we got right here. You are playing for 2 points Kevin Bacon movies, specifically from the 80s. Now, this does not have to be a movie where Kevin's Bacon makes an appearance. We all know that Christopher, well, anyone listening to the podcast knows that Christopher might have a little bit of an obsession with Kevin's Bacon.
I'm not obsessed. It's just everywhere.
I'm not obsessed. I just see what's in front of me. How many movies are you alleging that Kevin shows his little bacon?
How many has he been in?
Oh, I'm not going to tell you that.
Like all of them.
Haven't you guys played the 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
Where that's the thing.
Anybody you name in that is a celebrity that has ever been in a movie, they could, in 7 movies, they could tie Bacon into it.
Mm-hmm. But this one's even trickier, because I was wrong about a couple of these. There were some that I thought for sure were in the 80s, but they weren't. So this has to be from 1980s. But John Mark has the call right now. What number are you confident giving in 30 seconds, John Mark? Kevin Bacon, 1980
confident
movies.
Kevin Bacon movies from the 80s? 1.
Okay, that's fair. Start where you're comfortable. Christopher, how about you?
Fucking 2, bro.
Going 2. Going back to Lyle, do you feel comfortable naming 3
I only
Kevin
feel
Bacon
like
movies?
I know 90s movies, besides a few.
You got to at least know 3 Kevin Bacon.
I do, but I just don't want to lose any farther.
Good call. This is 2 points. But at the same time, you're leaving it up to Chris to only have to name 2 for 2 points.
Sure. That's true.
You give him a sizable lead over Lyle's -2 and John Mark's 0.
Damn.
This is a strategy, because you could get fucked here.
I'm going to let Chris do it. I'm going to let Chris do it, because the thing is that the only ones that I'm naming are from the 90s.
Okay.
So they have to be from the 80s?
I have 2 from the 80s,
only.
I think, in my head. But there's like 4 that are in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. So I'll let Chris go.
Okay. Christopher,
I might be.
Name that shit. And
I was deep into the 90s with my,
A lot of the ones we think of.
Well, Footloose, right? That would be one.
Yeah, you're going now.
Timer.
Okay.
You only need one more. You got 20 seconds to do.
God, it's like Stir of Echoes was 90s. I mean, like, Tremors? Was Tremors in the 90s or the 80s?
Tremors was the 90s. It was 1990.
This sucks.
6
Oh,
seconds.
man.
Why can't I do this? Man. Everything I think of is in the 90s.
That is time.
It's still,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, good call, Lyle. That evened up the score
Well,
a
it's
bit because
like
that's -2 for Chris,
Strackos,
which
all
takes
those
it.
other.
Throw me a
Yeah.
couple that were in the 80s so I don't feel so well. That make me feel better.
She's
Bump
having a
Fly.
baby, planes, trains, and automobiles. Quicksilver. I'm going to skip through the things that I think are bigger. Of course, you named Footloose. Diner was one of his earlier classics. Whitewater Summers, one of my favorite Kevin Bacon movies. But yeah, it's tough.
Must have been before his wiener started taking contracts, because that's about the only time I.
Yeah, you
dived
only
in, I
pay
guess.
attention to the Wiener era of Bacon. That's fair.
Yep.
But that takes your score down to -1.
Nice.
Yeah.
Still ahead of me.
Because that was a 2-pointer.
What?
Yeah. You're still ahead of me, but
I don't know about y'all, but I'm having a good time. Anyone that's listened to
Pretty
me lose
zero.
on Chris's news quiz over the last
Yeah.
decade, better part of the decade anyway, anytime that I see Chris struggle, now I don't go out of my way to make him struggle, like I'm pretty sure he does with me, or at least make me look stupid. But I do revel when it happens, and it doesn't happen all that often. So where does that take us? That takes us to round 2. Now here's where things get a little more exciting. It's the exact same thing as round 1, except now you have 15 seconds. So keep that in mind with these numbers. And we're going back to the Select-O-Matic. This is Chris's turn. What does the Select-O-Matic have in store? You are playing for 1 point, and the topic is, this is tricky. Movies starring David Bowie. Chris, how confident are you naming David Bowie movies in 15 seconds?
I'm going to say 2. Lyle.
2? Okay. It goes to Lyle. You think you could do 3?
no. Actually, the 2 I think that I know are the same. That's probably Chris knows. Everybody else does.
Okay. Well, so are you telling Christopher to name that shit?
Hold
Giving
on,
him a
hold on
chance
second.
to give it a second here. This is from any era. Let me sip my bizarre concoction.
I got 3.
I know that sucks too. I'm just not sure the name of it. I'm gonna let Chris go with 2.
Okay. All right, Chris. 15 seconds starts right now.
Labyrinth.
Of course.
And the one magician movie that I know he's in, where The Illusionist.
You picked the wrong one.
No, it's the other one, isn't it? With the other guys.
2 seconds.
Fuck my life. I'm going to be in way negative now.
Oh, no.
Why am I the only one
Unfortunately,
Why?
it was The Prestige, where he played Nikola Tesla. Yeah. It's easy to get that movie confused.
Didn't he play in Dune, or am I wrong?
No, that was Sting.
That was Sting.
He was also in Twin Peaks Walk With Me. He was in Mr. Rice.
Hunger, Man Who Fell to Earth.
Yeah, Man Who Fell to Earth.
Zoolander.
Was he in Zoolander?
Yeah,
I got my list in front of me, but...
It's called The Walk-Off.
Yeah. He's been in tons of movies. And it's surprising when you see the list. Even SpongeBob SquarePants movie. David Bowie. All right, well, that takes you to -2 now, Chris.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
anybody's game. It's -2. John Mark is in the lead with 0.
0? Yeah.
Pick some A-class guinea pigs, bro.
It's looking a little like Celebrity Jeopardy up in here, but
Yeah.
anybody's game. And we got a ways to go. But I will say this. Round 2 is the last round with all 3 of you. Whoever comes out on top, the 2 top players of round 2 will go on to sudden death in round 3. So
I hate this all.
be careful. Got to be careful. All right, let's see what Lyle has in store for the Select-O-Matic. Oh, now this is exciting. 2 points for naming Stephen King books turned into films.
Oh.
Now, you only have 423 to choose from, so this could get tough. But this is for 2 points. Lyle, how many Stephen King books that were turned into movies?
I'm going with 4.
4. Remember, this is 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
John Mark, I feel like you be pretty confident. I feel like all of you would be pretty confident in this category, quite honestly.
You said 4?
Yeah, you got a best 4 unless you want Lyle to have to do 4 in 15 seconds.
I'll go 5.
And Christopher, do you think you could do 6? Stephen King?
Do 6. I got to get these points. I got to do 6.
You're going to do 6.
Yep.
And Lyle, it goes back to you. You got a chance to do 7 or tell Christopher to name that shit.
Oh, Chris. I don't know if I could do 7, so I'm gonna.
7 is a lot in.
It's a 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be bam,
Chris
bam,
couldn't
bam, bam.
do 2 in 15 seconds. Remember that a little bit ago, Chris?
I know. I'm waiting the nag here. I gotta make a bold move.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Do these have to be based off Stephen King books, or they could be based off Stephen King stories?
Based on Stephen King books. Adaptations of Stephen King books.
Yeah.
So not a short story.
I got to do it while they're fresh in my brain.
I'll accept a short story, sure. Well, I'll accept a novella. How about that? No, not a short story. A book, a novella, or a novel.
It has to be a movie, not a TV series.
Not
right?
a TV series. All movies. Okay. But it's still Lyle's call. Can you do?
No, not in 15 seconds. No.
Okay, so that
not 8. No.
Okay. Chris?
I think I said 7. Didn't I
You're
say
doing
7?
Yeah, but I can't do 8. So you gotta be.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, Chris, your time starts right now.
Christine, Carrie, The Gunslinger, It, The Stand, The Shining, 1408, Green Mile.
That's it.
I think I got.
You got it.
I think I got it, motherfuckers.
You got it.
Points.
Nice.
Did you get it?
Yeah.
Nice.
Very good. I felt confident about that one. So you're back.
Is the Green Mile a movie?
Yeah, Green Mile's a movie.
Green Mile was a movie, but I didn't know Stephen King wrote it.
A lot of people didn't. Same with Stand By Me, and there are a few tricky ones in there that a lot of people don't know. But at this point, he's dozens of movies that have been based on his books.
Green Mile was a weird thing that he did. Like when it came out, he wrote it was like a serial, and he wrote like a series of it was like 5 or 6 little novellas that he published every few months that one would come out. It was like
the Four Seasons was one. I think it had like 4 different stories in it, short stories in the novel.
Yeah. Well, Christopher is back in the positive, and a good lead. 2 to John Mark's 0 to Lyle's -2. So we got one more go through of round 2. You want to do your best here. So think about this. I think you guys have an opportunity to catch up here. You need a 3-point. Oh, you got a 2-pointer. Not quite. But this is a good category. Clint Eastwood Westerns. John Mark, the call is yours. How many Clint Eastwood Westerns can you name in 15 seconds? There are some gems in there.
I'll say 4.
4. Okay. Christopher, do you think you can best that in 15 seconds?
Here's the problem.
2 points.
If I say 5, I have a feeling that Lyle's going to say, fucking do it. So I'm going to say,
I'm going to leave you to
do it, John Mark.
Mm-hmm. So you're telling John Mark to name that shit?
Baby.
All right, John Mark, your time starts right now.
Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, $2 More, High Plains Drifter. That's 4, right?
Done. Mm-hmm. I knew if you knew the Sergio Leone trilogy that you would be well on your way. I expected The Unforgiven. High Plains Drifter was a good call. All right.
I was going to say Unforgiven, but I only said 4, so I didn't want to just throw that in there.
Didn't want to gloat. Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Lyle. You have been eliminated with your -2. But here's the good news. You get to stick around, so don't masturbate or anything in there because we can see you. But we are going to sudden death with Christopher.
How did you do that, Chris?
And John Mark. Wait, do it again? No.
It's magic.
Some people are a fan of the fantastic. The thrilling.
I will amaze you.
Well, John Mark did a little magic trick himself.
Wow.
Thought we might be seeing an ass.
It's like my full moon.
Mm-hmm. Round 3 is a little bit different. I'm going to be reading off some hints slowly over a 60-second period. Each of you will get your own 60-second shot. As soon as you know the movie title, say it for a point, and we will move on to the next one. But if you guess wrong twice, you lose a point. Now, you are allowed 2 passes during this 60-second period, so use them if you get stuck. And we will start with John Mark. 60 seconds on the clock. Now, hair, goth, sharp, fingers.
Oh, Edward Scissorhands.
Yep. Next, rabies, trapped.
Pluto.
Yep. Next, computer, neon, space frisbee, the 80s, bridges.
Tron.
Yep. Castle, mob, bolts, green,
Pass.
students, meat, showers, Lassie, Bob Clark,
Pass.
unicorn.
How many passes?
Devil, princess,
Legend.
Oh, that's time. I don't think you quite got it in time. But you did get 3. You got Edward Scissorhands, Cujo, and Tron. You missed Frankenstein and Porky's. You said legend right at the end, but I don't think you quite got it in time. So that brings your grand total up to 5. So Chris, you need to do 3 or better.
Okay.
I will come up with a tiebreaker if need be. And your 60 seconds begins right now. Wig, motel, mother, knife.
Psycho.
Yep. Bike, suit, dinosaur, bow tie.
Pass.
Large, cigarettes, bathroom, snowball, trench
Clerk.
coat. Yep.
Clerks.
Muscles, violent, swords.
Conan
Be more specific.
the Barbarian. Conan the Barbarian.
Yep. And for the tiebreaker, 3. Remake, speaker box, Drew,
Pass.
roses, naked.
American Beauty.
Oh, you got it right at 0. All right. It's a tie. Okay. You got Clerks, Conan, and Psycho. You missed
American
Charlie's
Beauty.
Angels. Well,
That was
American
4.
Beauty you got right at 0.
Oh, okay, fine.
Same with me and Legend.
Yeah.
Fair.
So we got to be fair. I don't have a tiebreaker. It's funny. It took exactly the amount that I had ready, but I can do this.
Let's crack for it.
I'll do this right here. I'll write it down. Now, you guys are going to have to be, this is going to be head to head. Robots. Changing. Semi.
Transformers.
There you go.
Oh, God damn it.
All right. Well, Christopher wins with 6 points. Or whatever.
All the comebacks, son.
Okay, I fucking was at the bottom and now I'm here.
You're at the bottom and now you're at the top. It's exactly how you like to do things. No one wants to stay in the same spot. Well, congratulations, Christopher.
Thank you.
It
I wear
wasn't
the
looking
crown
good for
forever.
a minute. It wasn't
No,
looking
I
very
said-
good
Pulled
for a
out the
minute.
last, he pulled out at the last second.
He did
I
pull
did.
out at the last second.
Something your mom should have done, John Mark. Boom.
No.
Ooh. Now,
I can
if you
say that
wanna,
because I finally beat you.
well, that's the thing. Is like John Mark wins 99% of the weird trivia on our podcast. How bizarre! So I was surprised to not see you pushing forward a little bit more, but you know, it's the confidence in that clock thing. There is something that happens when that clock starts ticking, and you just don't know if you can name 5 Clint Eastwood westerns. You just don't know.
Right? Yeah. It's like, you know that information's in your head, but if you try to pull it out, like, on
Where?
demand.
Yeah.
Don't pull out on demand.
Well, if you want your business or band or podcast, as long as there's 3 of you to come on the show, maybe we can do family night. I don't know how I'm going to do this yet. Where to go, Chris? Put it. Oh,
Nice. It's amazing.
Magic.
You guys, I'm
In
oh,
trouble.
hold on. I'm back. My microphone.
Goddamn Chris Angel.
I was
shit.
I think I'm
nerve-wracking
getting
for a little
good,
bit.
guys.
I think we hear the
I'm
inside
good.
of your ass for a second there.
Hold on. And we're back.
Oh, oh man.
Send me an email, radarstationart@gmail.com. We'll get you in the lineup. We've got a few things already scheduled out. The very next episode will be my beloved Radar Dames. We'll have 3 of them playing head to head, pun very much intended, and we will be talking a little bit about the upcoming Halloween show. So that'll be coming next week. Looking forward to that.
I think you need to have a circle of winners. After your 3rd one, you invite your 3 champions back to go head-to-head.
Crown of shit.
Yeah.
the crown of shit. What would you call that? Championship. The crown of shit championship.
Championship.
Yeah.
Championship.
Championship. We've done it.
The championship.
And this one's been
Championship round.
Championship round. This thing writes itself. This is easy.
Name that. Take that shit.
And if you have a business or you have
Take that shit.
and you want to donate prizes for our winners, that would be a great way to sponsor the show. You can do no, I'm sorry, the booze is kicking in at this point. This was the inaugural podcast game show. But same email, radarstationart@gmail.com. And if you like any of this, I don't know how well we've sold the show tonight, but you can tune into the How Bizarre Podcast at howbizarrepodcast.com or listen at your favorite podcast catcher, as they say, iTunes, Spotify, and the rest. I really don't know what the kids are listening to these days. It's mostly Spotify, I think, right? iTunes,
Spotify and iTunes. Maybe Stitcher still around. You don't hear about
I used to love
stuff.
Stitcher, but I don't know. The problem with Stitcher is that they upload your shit and then they restream it. So
Yeah.
that could be restreamed to 100 people, but it
You have no
counts to
idea.
you as one download. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a weird, and they tack on their own ads whenever they want. Yeah, I'm not on Team Stitcher anymore, but it was a cool concept. Anywho, let's get on out of here. Tune in next time for another astounding and probably slightly different rendition of Name That Shit. We'll fine-tune this and let us know if there's something you'd like to see. We won't probably listen to it, but it'll make you feel good and validated. And, everyone likes to feel good and validated. So tune in next week, y'all.
See you guys.
Good night.
Holy shit, Harold. Before you worked here, Harold, we got him cornholing so many decedents.
Yeah,